that the U.S. is facing total destruction at the hands of Muslims. She spoke about her book recently at the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. This is just under an hour.
Heritage Foundation, of course, is interested in maintaining basic principles, the rule of law, private enterprise, limited government, and individual freedom. The challenges we face in the world today are great for all of those principles. We're pleased today to have one individual who has had first-hand experience with some of the political challenges we do face around the world. Our featured speaker this morning is Brigitte Gabriel, a journalist and news producer. Ms. Gabriel began her career as the news anchor for World News, the evening news broadcast for Middle East television, seen weeknights throughout Israel, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Cyprus, and Lebanon. She reported on the Israeli security zone in Lebanon and the Palestinian uprising in the West Bank as they unfolded. She is a former production coordinator for ARD, that's German television, in South Lebanon, Gaza, and the West Bank. She is also the former satellite video distribution coordinator for worldwide television news studios in London. After relocating to the United States in 1989, she founded an entertainment company providing services to national and international media clients. Then in 2002, she founded the American Congress for Truth, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supplying information about the ongoing Middle East conflict. She appears often on news and information television shows and talk radio programs. She is fluent in 4 languages: Arabic, French, English, and Hebrew. Hers is a personal story, one I look forward to hearing, and one from which we can better understand the threats faced by the free world today. Brigitte, welcome to Heritage.
Thank you. I am honored and delighted to be here today, and I thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come here and hear me speak about the Middle East conflict from my own personal experience. When people hear about the Middle East, they think all the countries in the Middle East are Muslim countries. This was not the case 30 years ago. Lebanon was the only majority Christian country in the Middle East. Lebanon was the most westernized modern country in the Middle East. When we got our independence from France in the early 40s, the majority of the population were Christian. The Muslims were the minority. We prospered, we built the country, we are the descendants of the Phoenicians, we were good in commerce. And in a very short period of time, Lebanon became Paris of the Middle East, the banking capital of the Middle East. We had the best universities in the Middle East, the best education centers, the best schools, the best theaters. We exported the theater and the art to the rest of the Arabic world. That's why a lot of Arabic countries understand the Lebanese dialect through our culture, but while we do not understand many of theirs. We had open borders. We were a very multicultural society. We allowed people to come into our country freely and study in our country. They usually graduated and stayed there because our country offered them the best economic perspective for a job in the Middle East, even though we didn't have any oil. That was Lebanon. The situation began to change gradually as the Muslims started growing and becoming more than 50% of society. We, the Christians, do not multiply as much, while the Muslims, not many, but most of them, a lot of them are allowed to marry up to 4 wives at a time. This is how they multiplied. We started shrinking, they started growing. The most famous Muslim in the world today is Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden is 1 out of 53 children. He himself has 27 children. Between father and son, they have produced 80 children. How many people do you know, my dear friends sitting in this room, have produced 80 children, if you're willing to confess? And we're not talking about his other 52 brothers and sisters. This is what tipped the scale in the Middle East over the years. And we always had our problem controlled with the Muslims until the influx of the Palestinians out of Jordan, when King Hussein kicked them out of Jordan in Black September. And actually King Hussein killed more Palestinians in Black September than the state of Israel has killed in all its existence. Lebanon, not surprisingly, being a country based on Judeo-Christian values with open borders and multicultural attitude, took the Palestinians in. We were the only country in the Middle East who took the Palestinians in for the third wave of refugees in 1970. Once they came in, they put their heads together with the radical Islamists in our country and declared holy war on the Christians. Yasser Arafat tried to establish in Lebanon a base from which to attack Israel, something he tried to do in Jordan and failed because of the Jordanian dictatorship by the king. Yet he was able to do it in Lebanon, using our laws, our multiculturalism, our tolerance, and our open-mindedness against us. The problem worsened by 1974. Christians became prisoners to their homes and towns. We stopped traveling. I would ask my parents, how come we're not going to Beirut this year for Christmas? Because the rest of my family lived in Beirut. And my father would give me an excuse, well, we decided to stay home this year, which wasn't fun for a 10-year-old child. And you have to understand, I'm an only child to my parents. My parents were married for over 20 years. They could not have any children. My mother was 55 years old and my father was 60 when I was born. So staying home with two elderly parents on Christmas wasn't that exciting. The reason why we stopped traveling is because the Muslims and the Palestinians would set up checkpoints and would stop cars driving. And they would look at the people's IDs. And in Lebanon, as in throughout the Middle East, our religion is identified on our ID. You are either a Christian, a Muslim, or a Jew. So when the Palestinians and the Muslims would stop the car and see that this family is a Christian family, they would get them out of the car and shoot them in cold blood. It was called identity killing at the time. We stopped traveling. That's why we became prisoners. By 1975, the Palestinians and the Muslims formed an army called Jaysh Lebanon al-Arabi, the Arabic Lebanese army, and started taking over the military bases and destroying the Lebanese infrastructure and attacking the Lebanese government institutions. The army base above my house in South Lebanon was the last army base left in the country, in the hands of the Lebanese army. This was in 1975. They grouped their people together, and in trying to take over the military base in my town, they bombed my home, bringing it down and burying me under the rubble. This was in 1975. I was wounded. I ended up in a hospital for 2.5 months and undergone surgeries. And I would ask my parents, why did they do this to us? And my father would tell me, because we are Christians. The Muslims consider us infidels. So I learned at a very young age, at age 10 years old, that I am wanted dead simply because I was born into the Christian faith. I left the hospital and I came home, and my home was no longer the home I left. I ended up living in a bomb shelter, underground, with no electricity, no water, and very little food. To get some water, we would crawl to a nearby spring under snipers' bullets, my mother and I, in a ditch. And we would get to the spring, and my mother had to use the stocking on top of the bottle of water to catch all the worms and all the rocks and all the maggots so we can drink the water. And then we would crawl back to the bomb shelter. Before we left, every time we would say our last goodbyes, because we did not know if we're going to come back alive or dead. We didn't have any food. My mother finally crawled up to our storage place and brought down rice, dried and dried lentils and dried chickpeas. And she would soak them overnight so we can eat, and this was the food we lived on. The only greenery we had to eat was the grass that grew around our bomb shelter. I would crawl out under the bombs and I would dig grass out. And I learned how to peel the thorn so I can eat the stalk with my ripe hands of 12 years old, so I can eat the green stalk inside the thorn. That was the only greenery we ate. We had no heat. We would freeze. We are in the mountains. We are next to the border of Israel. My father had to break twigs from trees and pour kerosene and benzene on them in the middle of our bomb shelter, our 8-by-10 room where we lived underground. And many times we would cuddle around the fire, and many times we would fall asleep. And we had an agreement. Whoever woke up first would drag the other two outside and slap them on their face to wake up because of carbon monoxide poisoning. We would pass out. This was my life. Meanwhile, we were surrounded by the Palestinians and the Muslims who want to slaughter us. And we knew what our fate was going to be because we knew what they were doing to the Christian towns in Lebanon as they overtaken the country. People that have fled from the rest of Lebanon who came to our area would tell us what they were doing in the other parts of Lebanon. One of the famous massacres is the massacre of the Moor. They massacred many Christians. They would walk into a bomb shelter, meaning the Islamists and the Palestinians. They would find the family hiding in a bomb shelter. They would find a mother and a father with a little baby. They would take the baby, tie one leg of the baby to the mother and another leg to the father, and pull the parents apart, splitting the child in half. They would walk into our churches, urinate and defecate on the altar, using the Bibles as toilet paper. The last lady that worked for me was completely mentally disturbed. I hired her so I can take care of her and her family. They tied her to a chair. They tied her 16-year-old son on her lap, held a knife to her hand, and made her behead him before they raped her 2 daughters in front of her. I think the biggest disservice the American media did to the American public is not show them the beheading of Daniel Pearl and Nick Berg. I think we in America as a civilization need to understand the barbaric nature of the enemy we are facing that's heading our way. Few people from my town, knowing what our fate was going to be, went to Israel, who was supposedly the enemy at the time. Israel was supposedly Lebanon's enemy, according to the government-controlled media. But we as Christians, our back was to the Jews, Israel. Our front was to the Palestinians and the Muslims. And we knew of the 2 evils, of the 2 devils, the Jews are not going to slaughter us because we had more shared values with them than we had with the radical Islamists and the Palestinians. Few people from my town went to Israel and begged for help. And Israel started coming in the middle of the night from 1976 till 1978. Bringing food for the children, bringing bomb shelters to the people who didn't have a bomb shelter, bringing blankets to the family, bringing medication, bringing food for the military, bringing ammunition to the Christians, and teaching them how to fight, taking them into Israel to be trained. Because the Christian Lebanese had college degrees, had education, they were not street gangs. And you can have all the college degrees on your wall behind you, your doctorates, your law degree, and everything else. It doesn't do you squat when you are faced with an enemy who believes that beheading you is an order from Allah. And this is how we stayed alive for another 2 years, until 1978. One day, one of our militia members, the Christian militia in the south, came to us and he said, I just want to let you know that tonight we're going to be attacked and we may die because we had lost so many people and I don't think we can fight. And I just want to wish you a merciful death. And I remember dressing in my burial clothes at age 13 because I did not want to look ugly when I'm dead because I wanted to look pretty. And I remember putting on my Easter dress that my mother had made for me. And we had a 2-hour ceasefire. And my mother was combing my long hair and tying a white ribbon in it that matched the white flowers in my dress. And I stood there looking at the little mirror in the bomb shelter crying, begging her, I don't want to die. I'm only 13 years old. The only reason I didn't die that night is because that night is when Israel came in physically into Lebanon and pushed the Palestinians and the Muslims away from our area. That was Operation Litani. We've been hearing a lot about the Litani for the last month or 2 months because of what's been happening with Hezbollah. And Israel set up checkpoints around our areas. And this is what kept us alive for another 4 years, until Israel invaded Lebanon all the way to Beirut in 1982. And the reason why Israel entered Lebanon in 1982, because Israel was working with the Christians in Lebanon to liberate Lebanon from the radical Islamic element supported by Syria, protected by Iran, financed by the petrodollars pouring from all around the Arabic country to help Yasser Arafat create a base to terrorize Israel. They wanted to destroy the only Arabic democracy that existed in the Middle East. The Christian Lebanese were working with Israel. The Christian Lebanese from Beirut were being trained in Israel and in Tel Aviv, just as well as the Christians in South Lebanon. Israel came in, and the only reason Israel came in was because Syria, who was financing the radical Islamists and supporting them and protecting them and supplying them with weaponry, were shelling the northern towns of Israel to the point where the northern towns of Israel, their lives ceased to exist. They lived in bomb shelters just like us. And this didn't go on for a month or 2. This went on for a year. before Israel invaded Lebanon. And Israel entered all the way to Beirut to push the Syrian cannons and the artillery and the machine guns so their guns would not reach northern Israel. And they were working with the Christians, hopefully, to expel Yasser Arafat and the PLO out of Lebanon and control the radical element that had taken hold of the country. Nobody in the world understood what was happening, because the Palestinian propaganda machine and the Muslim radical propaganda machine, which was well financed and oiled by petrodollars, was well at work while the West was asleep. During that time, my mother became wounded, and we had to take her to an Israeli hospital for treatment because Israel was our only lifeline. She was wounded by an Islamic shell falling in front of our bomb shelter as the Muslims were retreating when Israel was advancing into Lebanon. And I'm going to tell you a little story that changed my outlook and changed my life. Before we left the bomb shelter to take my mother to the hospital, my father handed me $60. He said, here's $60 in case you needed it, since you're going to be taking your mother to Israel. And I remember touching money for the first time in my life. Because when you live in a bomb shelter, you don't go shopping. And I took the money, and we went up to the Lebanese hospital that Israel has fixed. Israel had fixed up a room, put an Israeli soldier on duty and 2 Israeli nurses to give my mother first aid. They gave her first aid, put her in an Israeli-donated ambulance, drove us to the border, which was a 10-minute drive. The driver was a Lebanese driver, actually an acquaintance of the family. We got to the border. They took my mother out of the ambulance in Lebanon and put her inside Israel into another ambulance to drive us an hour. The Lebanese driver walks around to me and asks me if I had any money for the fee for the ambulance. And like an innocent teenager, I pulled the money out of my pocket and I handed it to him. And I said, how much do I owe you? And he looks at it and he says, give me 30, which was half the money I had. So I handed him $30 and I thanked him very much. And I sat in the Israeli ambulance inside Israel to drive us to the hospital, which was an hour away. The Israeli driver treated me like his own daughter. He could see a teenager who was uncertain of what was going to happen. My mother was laid unconscious in the back stretcher of that ambulance. He treated me like his own daughter with such respect and such compassion. We got to the emergency room in the Israeli hospital of Itzfat. We got out of the ambulance, and I remember taking the money out of my pocket and handing it to the Israeli driver, thinking to myself, my God, if the 10-minute drive cost me $30, I'm sure this is not going to be enough. And I handed him my money. And he looked at the money and he said, what is this for? And I said, this is for the hospital, for the ambulance ride. And he said, no, this is a free service from us to you. Keep your money and take care of your mother. I wish her a speedy recovery. And I could not believe my eyes and ears. I thought to myself, what an ethical man. What an honest man. This man could have taken my money and partied all night and I would not have known the difference. Yet he didn't. And I became very angry because I realized the Lebanese driver basically robbed me. He stole my money. And he was an acquaintance of the family. That was my first lesson. And the difference in culture and values between the Arabic culture and the Israeli culture. We got into the hospital and there were hundreds of people wounded on the floor. There were Lebanese wounded brought in from Lebanon. There were Palestinian militia wounded brought in from Lebanon. There were Lebanese Christian brought in, Lebanese Muslim brought in, Israeli soldiers brought in. And I could not believe my eyes. The doctors treated everyone according to their injury. They did not see religion. They did not see political affiliation. They did not see nationality. They saw people in need and they helped. I could not believe my eyes. The doctor treated my mother before he treated the Israeli soldier laying next to her. They took my mother to the 4th floor of the hospital where 2 other Muslim ladies were brought in earlier that morning. And we were not in the room but maybe 5 minutes, and I heard all this commotion outside our window, outside our balcony, and people were running through our room out to the balcony to see what was happening. And I walked out to look what was happening. And 2 Israeli helicopters had just landed, taking out Israeli wounded soldiers brought in from Lebanon. And I stood at that balcony feeling sick to my stomach. I felt ashamed. I felt humiliated. After all, these people are wounded because of the war with my country. I didn't know how the people standing next to me are going to react to me. I didn't make eye contact with anyone. And then I felt this tap on my shoulder. And I looked to my side, and there was an Israeli nurse standing next to me, and she said, "You are new here, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, I am. As a matter of fact, they just brought in my mother to this room." And she put her arm around me, and she said, "Don't worry, we'll take good care of her. Everything will be just fine." And I started crying. I started sobbing. Because for the first time in my life, I experienced compassion. I experienced the human quality that I knew my culture will not be able to show their enemy in their time of need. I knew if I was a Jew standing on the 4th floor or any hospital in the Middle East, I would be lynched and thrown down to my death as shouts of joy of Allahu Akbar would echo through the hospital and down the surrounding streets. I spent 22 days in the hospital in Israel. Those days changed my life, changed the way I believe information, changed the way I listen to the radio. I learned I was sold a lie by my government about the Israeli people and the Jewish people that was so far from reality. It was amazing. The same, one of the Muslim ladies with us in the room, she was there for over 10 days. And when the Israeli soldiers would come and take care of her wound and change her wound in the morning, the minute they would leave, she would look at them and she would say, "I wish you were all dead. I hate you." And if you could see evil, I saw evil. Because when you hate so deep that you are unable to be grateful to the people that save your life, you have crossed the fine line between humanity and something very ugly on the other side. I vowed that one day I will return to Israel. Because these were the type of people I want to live amongst. This was the type of culture I wanted to adopt. A culture of civilized people who respects all others, who shows compassion to others. You want to know real people? The time you know the true face of a person is when they are in a tragedy. That's when their true colors shine. And the colors of the Israelis were respect, compassion, and love. While all the Israelis from Israel heard that there were Lebanese people wounded in the Israeli hospitals and came to visit, bringing in chocolates, bringing in baklava, telling people, "Our homes are your home. If you need any help, just come, let us help you out." It was an amazing scene. And all you heard on Lebanese television, the barbaric Israeli enemy invading Lebanon and torturing Lebanon and destroying the Lebanese infrastructure. Nobody destroyed the Lebanese infrastructure but the radical Islamists and the PLO who ravaged Lebanon. And this is exactly what we're seeing today. I ended up moving to Israel when I was 20 years old to become news anchor for World News in the Middle East, where I covered world events and reported on world news. And I saw the same pattern being repeated. What I used to think is a regional problem between radical Islamists and Christian Lebanese was becoming a world problem. The Achille Lauro, the Pan Am flight, the TWA flights, the killing, the hijacking. It was the same Muslims' name perpetrating it. Ahmed, Hussein, Muhammad, Ali. The same of the victims, Terry Anderson, Terry Waite, General Higgins, all American Western names, Jews or Christians. And now I am in the United States. And people today have such misinformation in our country, it is mind-boggling. I realize that the same enemy that Israel has been fighting for over 50 years are the same enemy today who are fighting Western civilization. No one paid attention then, but now we better pay attention. Great example is Hamas. The terrorist organization Hamas. When people hear Hamas, they think Hamas is an 8,000 miles away problem. Hamas is an Israel problem. Hamas is here in the United States. Hamas, of all the terrorist organizations in America that have set up shop in America, and the top three are Al-Qaeda, Islamic Jihad, and Hamas. Hamas has the largest infrastructure on American soil. Hamas has cells in over 40 states in the United States. They have cells in, and I'm going to name you a few cities that might interest you. Boston, Massachusetts, New York, New York, Laurel, Maryland, Potomac, Maryland, Washington, D.C., Henderson, Virginia, Springfield, Virginia, Raleigh, North Carolina, Boca Raton, Florida, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Cleveland, Ohio, Charlotte, North Carolina, Orlando, Florida, Tampa, Florida, Seattle, Washington, San Francisco, California, Santa Clara. You get the idea. In over 40 states. This is the problem we're facing today. Many people who turned a blind eye to evil and did not pay attention to what was happening are now paying the price. In the Hamas Charter, Article 22 of the Hamas Charter, which was published and made public in 1988, states as the organization's the enemy. and I'm quote you verbatim, Article 22, quote, with their money, they created secret organizations, talking about the enemy, that spread around the world in order to destroy societies and carry out Zionist interests. Such organizations are the Freemasons, Rotary clubs, Lions clubs, B'nai B'rith, and the likes. All of them are destructive espionage organizations to be destroyed. You tell me, my fellow Americans, and those of you watching on television, how many of you know Lion Club members, Rotary Club members, Freemasons, who get up early in the morning in their communities to raise money and better their communities? No, they are mentioned as enemies of Hamas organization, the terrorist organization that has the largest infrastructure on American soil. We need to take political correctness and throw it in the garbage where it belongs and start educating our people. Not only we have a problem with Hamas, we have a problem with radical Islam being spread here through the mosques in the United States, financed by so-called our ally, Saudi Arabia. Thank God for privately funded organizations that can go undercover into these mosques. One of those great organizations, our Freedom House, the Center for Freedom for Religious Studies. They went undercover into the top mosques in the United States and collected over 200 books and publications from Islamic institutions and mosques. And some of these most prominent mosques are in Dallas, in Houston, in Chicago, New York, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, and Oakland. And they took a sample of all these books and translated them. And these books are supplied directly by the government of Saudi Arabia. And it's to teach Muslims living in infidel lands, like our land, non-Islamic land, on how to live, on how to deal with non-Muslims. In relations with all non-Muslims, these Saudi books and publications repeatedly exhort, quote, Muslims to, quote, hate them for their religion, meaning us and you and everybody else watching, to hate for Allah's sake, always oppose them in every way, maintain a wall of resentment against them. They say that democracy is responsible for all the horrible wars of the 20th century, and that attractive names like democracy, justice, freedom, brotherhood, and equality cause all of the world's problems. This is what's being taught right here in American mosques. They say that all religions but Islam are false, and that it is the religious duty of every Muslim to impose, quote, functionally Islamic government on every country in the world. This religious duty is binding in principle, in law, in self-defense, in community, and as a sacred obligation of jihad. In order to fulfill the sacred obligation of jihad, they must, quote, invade its western heartland and struggle to overcome it until all the world shouts by the name of the Prophet Muhammad and the teachings of Islam spread throughout the world. Only then will Muslims achieve their fundamental goal: all religion will be exclusively for Allah. This is what young Muslims, young and old, are learning in American mosques in the United States today. And if I may add, they are teaching in Islamic madrasas in the United States as you and I are meeting in this room. They're teaching young American Muslim students that Christians and Jews are apes and pigs because we are cursed by Allah. This is what they're learning. Now you tell me, my fellow Americans, can we dare say this type of verbiage against, let's say, can we say blacks are monkeys and gays are pigs? This type of education is not permissible. This type of verbiage is not allowed to be taught against any group of people in any religion, in any color. This is hate education. We have seen the result of this hate education in the Palestinian territories, their unleashing of suicide bombing into Israel, and this is what's being prepared right now in America today unless we wake up and identify the problem. And a few days ago, we had a report come out and say that our being in Iraq just increased a little bit the terrorist attack. It's because we are there that they are very angry with us. Well, I've got a little piece of news for everyone. Under the banner of La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah, there is no God greater than Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. They killed Jewish children in Israel. They massacred Christians in Lebanon, meaning the Muslims. They killed Hindus in India, Copts in Egypt, Assyrians in Syria, Armenians in Turkey, and expelled over 900,000 Jews out of Arab land. That has nothing to do with us being in Iraq, being in Afghanistan, has absolutely nothing to do with America. This is the time America needs to wake up and realize what is coming her way. And I'm going to end on this note before I open it for questions. So many times in the last 100 years, people have stood by and done nothing, allowing evil to prevail. As America stood up against and defeated communism, this is the time when America needs to come together and defend our Western democracy and defeat Islamofascism and radicalism. Because in our country and our freedom, we do not stand and do not agree with religious hatred, bigotry, and intolerance. And I urge you to act today and wake up. I thank you.
For some reason, I would suspect there are a few questions in the audience. And I'll start here on the back. Just wait for the microphone, and please do us the favor of at least giving your name and an affiliation.
My name is Brian Beery. I'm a journalist for Europolitics magazine. Just when you were talking about the Muslims, you sort of seemed to imply that it was a monolith with everybody holding these radical views. Do you not think that there's a large majority of Muslims that are much more moderate, and that the challenge is to work with them, to persuade, to force them, the moderates, to basically achieve victory over the radicals?
Exactly. This is exactly what we need. We need to challenge the moderate Muslims all throughout the world. You know, there are 1.2 billion Muslims in the world today. Not all of them are radicals. But in the intelligence community, we estimate there are between 15 to 25% who have been radicalized. That translates into 180 to 300 million people. That's almost as big as the population of the United States. So we do have Muslims living in the United States. Where are their voices? This is the only country in the world where Muslims can demonstrate, where Muslims can march in the streets, where Muslims can speak without being intimidated by the radicals. I can understand why they cannot do it in Libya, in Saudi Arabia, in Oman, in Jordan, in Syria, in Lebanon. But there is no excuse why the Muslims in the United States cannot take to the streets and rally and send a message to the radicals in the Middle East that we are Americans first. You kill one of us, you kill all of us. We condemn Hamas, we condemn Al-Qaeda, we condemn Jama'ah al-Islamiyya, we condemn Hezbollah. We haven't heard a blurb. Talk is cheap. Having had talking on television screen is empty verbiage, hot air just coming out. Actions speak louder than words. This is the time we need to challenge our Islamic community to take to the streets. Of all the mullahs in the United States, of all the members of mosques in the United States, since September 11th, have you seen a 1 million man march on the Capitol? Have you seen people come to the streets with the same passion as the radicals have and have taken to the streets in any other street in any other country? Let's talk about the passions of the Hezbollah supporters in Dearbornistan, Michigan, right here in our country. They were free to demonstrate in support of Hezbollah against the United States of America, yet we haven't seen this passion and this numbers of people coming out to the streets to defend America. Just last month, 2 reporters in the United States, Fox News reporters, Santani and Wig, were forced at gunpoint in Gaza to convert to Islam, and that was the only way they were able to survive. Now, a lot of Muslims tell us this is not what Islam stands for. If this is not what Islam stands for, and the whole world went up against the Pope, have we seen condemnation and demonstrations in the streets of any street USA condemning this barbaric behavior, 7th century behavior? Actions, my friends, speak louder than words. Our civilization is at stake, and this is the time we need to see people act, not talk. Yes.
Nichols, Washington Diplomat magazine. We got to get to the media, because you mentioned media, and they are the problem, the left-wing media in this country. They're almost against everything that we stand for in this country. I can't understand the left-wing media, liberal media. How are you going to get through your message? We can do our part as individuals. How do you reach the news organizations to change the tenor and the content of the news that's coming out?
You know, a lot of people in the liberal press say, I already have my mind made up, don't confuse me with the facts. This is the problem we are facing. But we are seeing a decline in the mass media, and we are seeing a lot of people are using alternative media sources, such as the internet, such as publications on the internet, such as talk radio, which have seen an incredible increase in talk radio. And this is how we get the message out. Every individual can get involved. I founded an organization in 2002 called AmericanCongressForTruth.com because I'm sick and tired of political officials who make it to Washington, D.C., get up there and forget the voices of the people who elected them. Lining their pockets with money becomes more important than protecting our borders, tightening our immigration, screening students who want to come and study in our country from hostile countries. So we started an organization. We have thousands of members in all 50 states in the United States and countries outside of America, people who want to know what they can do to make a difference. There's a lot of things. We send action alerts on a daily basis, and I encourage everyone to sign up to our website, AmericanCongressForTruth.org or .com, and sign up to receive our emails. And we give people tips. For example, if you live in a small town USA, you noticed the mosque being built, and you noticed radical behavior, people dressed more radically, behaving more radically, keeping to themselves, your antennas go up, go down, take an afternoon, go to City Hall, find out who owns the deed to that mosque. That's public information. Is it a Saudi foundation? Is it some Muslims from foreign countries whose name is on the deed? Write those names down. Come back to your home. Call your local FBI office. Turn the names to them. We are the eyes and ears of our government. Our government is not in every small town USA, but we are, and we can open our eyes, and we can play a part in protecting our nation. I also tell people, you can call your elected officials. Every phone call represents 1,000 voters. And I talk to elected officials and I say, how many people do you need to hear from on a national level in order for you to make an issue an issue? And they say, all we need to hear from is 40 to 50 people. That's it. The average American thinks, what's my voice going to do? They need to hear from 100,000 people. But here is why, the reason behind the numbers. If one person calls, he or she is representing 1,000 voters. Because he is willing to get up and make the phone call, and he represents 1,000 couch potatoes who, even though may think the same way, but are too lazy to make the call, but they do vote on election day. That translates to 40 to 50,000 voters on election day. Stop buying the mass media, the New York Times, stop buying the LA Times, stop buying the newspapers that are spreading lies, and start supporting organizations that support the truth and gets this type of truth, this politically incorrect truth, to you and to the American public. And this is how the mass people, mass Americans, can make a difference. Another question. I'm going to take this lady first. She raised her hand first.
Two quick questions.
Yes.
One is, why are the Muslims in this country, the moderates, not speaking out? And secondly, what is your opinion of the president of Palestine saying he would be able to go with 2 individual states? And what is your opinion on those things?
Well, I'm going to start with the moderates in this country who are not speaking out. We have very few moderates in this country who are speaking out, and I can count them on less than 5 fingers. One of them is a colleague of mine, Kamal Nawash, the president of Free Muslim Coalition Against Terrorism. Kamal tried to organize a rally in Washington, D.C. by the Free Muslim Coalition Against Terrorism last year to show their support to America against terrorism. The top 3 Muslim organizations in America not only boycotted the rally, not only put down the rally, refused to advertise the rally, but went on the attack against Kamal Nawash, saying that he does not represent the voice of the mainstream Muslim community. 50 people showed up to Kamal Nawash, a Free Muslim Coalition Against Terrorism rally. Most of them were Christians and Jews. Actions speak louder than words, and we need to start listening and watching what's happening in our country and translate what they are telling us, not what we're processing in our mind and hoping they would be saying. Reality is reality. Another question.
Excuse me, Ed Powers, my name. You had mentioned something like 15% or so of the 1.2 billion Muslims in the world are potentially been radicalized. In this country, I would suspect that that percentage is far lower, and that the potential there is still probably for many thousands to be radicalized. The concern that I have with taking on the campaign that you're talking about, even though I think there's a lot of merit to it, is possible overreaction in this country to a minority population. Just a half century ago, during World War II, we locked up hundreds of thousands of Japanese Americans because we feared they were in cahoots with the enemy. How do you prevent something like this from happening in this country to the overwhelming majority of law-abiding American citizens?
Absolutely, and we are never going to allow to happen what happened back in World War II. But we can be wise in the way we conduct our intelligence. For example, our government wanted to monitor certain mosques last year for radioactive material. Radioactive material. Now you tell me, how many temples and churches have you heard of that we are interested in monitoring them for radioactive material? And why should CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, oppose us to monitoring something where we know there are radioactive material to protect ourselves and our country? There are certain laws that we can put pressure on our elected officials to do where we're not endangering the majority of the Muslims. Obviously, we are not closing the mosques. Obviously, we are not locking them up. Obviously, we're letting the terrorists play in our ground. Look at September 11th, the biggest joke on America. The biggest terrorist act to ever happen on American soil happened by Muslims living in America, came to America either legally or illegally, holding American IDs, using American money, going to American flight schools, training in American flight schools to fly American airliners into American buildings to kill Americans. The whole job was done from within, not outside. So you do not need to just lock the 3 to 6 million Muslims that live in this country, but you can certainly, if you encourage our government to eavesdrop, there is a lot of terrorist attacks that have been foiled since September 11th because of the eavesdropping program. Just because you don't hear about it or it doesn't materialize into a big terrorist act doesn't mean that these programs are not working. The Patriot Act, you know, I come from a Lebanese heritage. I have no problem if the FBI wants to monitor any conversation I have. All they'll get is few laughs. I have no problem. They want to search my house? Give me 5 minutes. I'll make my teenagers pick up their bedrooms, and there you go. And anybody that doesn't sound the way I do, you better watch out. We are fighting a war for our survival. And this is the time the Islamic community needs to be challenged to turn the radicals within it into us and start working with our government. When you see one individual committing a terrorist act, like the 19 hijackers, like any terrorist, a terrorist doesn't work independently. A terrorist is part of a community. He is protected by a community, financed by a community, supported by a community, defended by a community, hidden in a community, nurtured in a mosque in the community. There is no vacuum in Middle Eastern communities throughout the United States. I come from the Middle East. Middle Eastern communities that live here basically just changed geography, changed territories. Everybody knows everybody's business. Walk into any neighborhood USA, walk into the Arabic grocery store, tell them, do you know Muhammad Ali, where he lives? They can tell you where he lives, how old is he, when was his birthday, if his mother is visiting in town, what business he has opened since he came to the United States. Any details that Americans will be stunned to know. And our American Islamic community needs to be challenged to turn the terrorists within it, and needs to be more active and voice their opinion more, like Kamal Nawash, like the few people that I know who are speaking out. Those voices need to come forward, and they are already forward. We just need the rest of the Islamic community to stand behind them against those who are wishing to do us harm. Yes? Okay.
We're going to go to this one. We're going back here first.
Hi, my name is Ernie Rosenberg, but my affiliation is, I'm here in my own private capacity. Two things. One is that even with the minimal things that we've done, the ineffective and inadequate things we've done, in Europe, the U.S. and Israel are considered more of a threat to peace than the Islamists.
Right.
And if we were to pursue a course like yours, how do we avoid being completely isolated? That's the first question. The second one is, I keep hearing about the overwhelming majority of peaceful Muslims, and my question is, where's the evidence that they exist?
What a great question. Thank you so much. I love the way you put that answer in your question. If they exist, this is a call to all Muslims living in the United States. If those of you moderates exist, and I'm talking directly to the camera, we want to see you in the millions on the streets of America demonstrating, sending a very clear message to the radical barbarians that live in the third world countries in the Middle East to condemn the barbaric acts that have been done in the name of Islam, your religion that supposedly has been hijacked. Because in our beliefs, if something of ours has been stolen or hijacked, we would scream to high heaven that it has been stolen. And we need to hear your voices if you're really upset that your religion has been stolen. Thank you. Oh, the U.S. and Israel. Yes, thank you. The U.S. and Israel are considered the great Satan. And many people do not realize. Let me tell you, America is the great Satan. Israel is just the little Satan tagging along with America. Keep that in mind. Whatever happens to Israel happens to us. There's a saying in Arabic, أولاً يأتي السبت وبعده الأحد. First comes Saturday, then comes Sunday. First we kill the Jews, then we come to the Christians. You ask anyone in the Middle East that saying, they'll know exactly what you're talking about. The Muslims have been raised with it. We, the Christians, have been raised with it. So, do we care about what Europe thinks? Europe right now is Eurabia. It is no longer Europe. Europe that we know used to be Europe has died, or it's on its dying bed. You walk down the streets of the Champs-Élysées in Paris, and what do you see? Women in hijab and in burqa. You see more men dressed in turbans than dressed in a Christian Dior attire and couture. You walk in London, I mean, unbelievable. In Denmark, in the year 2000, before 2001, the mullahs in Denmark were declaring from their mosques that by the year 2050, they will declare Denmark an Islamic state. That was 2000, before the big cartoon brouhaha. We were not paying attention, and we better start paying attention. And people need to pay attention to people who are like me, who came to this country, who escaped Islamic persecution, who are speaking up and saying, wake up America, wake up the West. We're going to be gone. We're going to be the next Eurabia unless we act now and defend our civilization. We're fighting Islamic totalitarianism. I'm going to let you ask the question. Did you ask a question yet? No.
My name is Kevin Mooney. I'm a reporter with the Cybercast News Service. I have a question about the controversy with the Pope. Is there anything the news media hasn't reported regarding that controversy that you would like to see get a little bit more airtime, a little bit more play?
The news and the Pope. And by the way, the Pope was quoting, you know, a 17th century Byzantine emperor talking about a 7th century religion, Islam, about violence in Islam, and Islam being spread through the sword and through violence. And what do the Muslims do? Burning churches, killing the nun. What the Pope was talking about is what we sit around the dinner table and talk about, is what we watch on the news, and in the evening news is what we hear on the news all day long, not only in America but all throughout the world. And I mentioned earlier Santani and Wig, the perfect example of the two Fox reporters. This forced conversion just happened last month. This is the 21st century. Nothing has changed, except now they have sophisticated Western technology called guns instead of the swords. Swords. My husband told me you need to say swords instead of swords. Yes.
Hello. My name is Madeline, and I am an American. And my question is, I recently heard a lot of news about a documentary called Obsession.
Yes.
What is your opinion of that?
Well, what can I say? I'm in the documentary, so I love the documentary. Obsession is an incredible documentary. It's a wake-up call about the threat of radical Islam to Western civilization, and I urge everyone to find that documentary and get it, see it, feature it in your community.
Watch for a future program at Heritage. We're working on that.
That's right. And it's a great documentary, and we need the support of people like you, of concerned Americans who are going to support production of documentaries like these, speaking engagements for people like me to go out and spread the word. We need to come together and work together to expose the truth. Not many people are willing to do that, sadly, and that's why our work is most important. Yes.
Hi, Faith McDonald from the Institute on Religion and Democracy. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
One thing, I recently saw Obsession, and something that I felt was left out was the connection with Sudan. And I know you mentioned Sudan in your book. I think we need to connect the dots all around the world.
Exactly.
And I just wondered if you have any contact with Southern Sudanese or Sudanese from the Nuba Mountains. The Muslims in the Nuba Mountains are the kind of Muslims you're talking about. They're the peaceful ones, and they want a secular democracy. But they would be a good contact for you and for all of us who want to work on stopping this.
Yes, we are working with different groups, and that's a great point, and I mentioned it in my book. Sudan, Indonesia, all around the world. Right now, as I'm speaking to you, there are conflicts in 44 countries around the world between Muslims and non-Muslims. Where is the voice of the moderates? We are not hearing it. All you hear about is the terrible acts committed in the name of Islam, but you don't hear the voices of the moderates. And the moderates are being silent, just like in Lebanon with this last war with Hezbollah and Israel. The Sunnis and the Christians are adamant against Hezbollah. They want the same old democratic Lebanon back. Prime Minister Siniora, who is a Sunni, who absolutely hates Sheikh Nasrallah, who's the head of Hezbollah, in the first 2 days of the war, Minister Siniora came out and said, how dare Hezbollah start a war without consulting with the Lebanese government? They had no right to kidnap the Israeli soldiers. Within few days, you saw the Prime Minister change his song and dance. The reason why? Because Hezbollah sent death threats to members of the Lebanese parliament that if you say anything against Hezbollah that makes Hezbollah look bad, you will face the same fate like Prime Minister Hariri. You will be killed. And this is why you started seeing more people in the Lebanese government be intimidated and talk about Israel is the enemy, Hezbollah is our hero. And by them appeasing the enemy and talking like this, look what Nasrallah did in Lebanon a few days ago with the rally they held in Lebanon. We want to overthrow the government of Lebanon and we want to make the government. Appeasement doesn't work. It's like feeding the crocodile, hoping you will be the last person to be eaten. And you will be the last person to be eaten. You've got to kill that crocodile in order to ensure your survival. And this is what we're seeing all around the world today. And it needs to stop. One more question.
Frederick Peterson, U.S. Freedom Foundation. I have first a brief comment and then a question for you. The comment is in response to the question previously given in concern for internment camps and a dramatic response to the threat within. Perhaps the primary question that must be answered for all of those who worry about excessive response is, are we or are we not at war? And the answer to that question will elicit the correct response, presuming we have the correct answer. Secondly, I'm concerned with Iran and Ahmadinejad. And I would like your comment and observation on what degree of credibility do you give to him, how much is act and how much is reality, and what would be the threat of a nuclear-armed Iran and the consequences of that to us? Thank you.
Iran is the biggest danger we are facing right now. Ahmadinejad is credible, credible, credible. Listen to every word he is saying. He is going to follow through on every word he is uttering. The minute Iran finishes their nuclear reactor or nuclear bomb, they will use it against Israel and wipe Israel off the map. And that doesn't only start with Israel. Their eyes are going to be next on the United States. The same thing happened to Hitler. When Hitler even wrote a book called Mein Kampf, My Struggle. That's what, Mein Kampf means. And he said exactly how much he hated the Jews and what he wants to do with the Jews. People said, oh, this guy is a lunatic. This guy is a madman. Well, guess what? Listen to what the madman is saying, because he is going to follow through on his threat. While we are wasting time beating around the bush, talking about UN sanctions, schmansions. I mean, these people could care less about sanctions. Face reality. You can have sanctions from now until the sun comes down. It doesn't affect them one bit. Remember, these people are used to living in poverty. They can very easily live on a bowl of rice. They do not need to go furniture shopping nor clothes shopping. They can survive. look at their standards and compare it to the standards of the United States. Sanctions are not going to affect them. Not to mention, we're going to have our enemies helping them, smuggling to them whatever we cut off from them. So he will follow through. He is not going to respect anything the UN says, because look what they did with Saddam Hussein. So what's going to change? He's got another 12 years to go. Only in 2 years he'll finish his nuclear bomb. And this is why it is so important to act. And we need to realize that Ahmadinejad is driven by an ideology of bringing back the 12th Imam, the hidden 12th Imam. What makes Ahmadinejad much more dangerous than Hitler is Ahmadinejad believes that the 12th Imam, who is hiding, who disappeared in a well, the only way he is going to come back is by creating chaos and catastrophe to bring about the Mahdi, where Islam is going to reign supreme. Even though Christians and Jews believe in the coming of the Messiah. The Jews believe the Messiah is going to come, and then we're going to have peace on earth. The Christians believe Jesus is going to return, and then we're going to have peace on earth. But as Christians and Jews, there is nothing we can do as people to ensure what time or how we can bring them back. In Islam, especially in the Shiite religion with the 12th Imam, the Mahdi, you can actually participate as a believer in bringing about this catastrophe to bring in the Savior. And this is where Iran is heading. And one of the Khomeinis was speaking to high school students 2 months ago, addressing the conflict with Israel. He said, even when we bomb Israel, he didn't say if, he said when we bomb Israel and wipe Israel off the map, it's a win-win victory for us, because not only we would have killed all the Jews according to Allah, but even if they bomb us back, and even if we lose millions, we will die as martyrs and go straight to heaven to sit on the right arm of God. So it's a win-win situation for us no matter what happens. See, this is an ideology of death that we as civilized nation has no point of reference to. We cannot relate, but we need to understand. We don't have to relate or have a point of reference with what he's talking about, but we need to understand as civilized, educated people where he is coming from and where he wants to go, and just be prepared to fight and stop him before he gets there. I thank you. My book is Because They Hate, a survivor of Islamic terror warns America. And I urge everyone to visit my website, AmericanCongressForTruth.org. Sign up to receive our action alerts and emails, and join us in defending America. Thank you.
Brigitte Gabriel is the president and founder of American Congress for Truth. For more information, visit AmericanCongressForTruth.org.